This weekend, the 2nd of July 2016, we as Australians get to exercise our democratic right to vote for who's going to be our nation's next leader. Hi, I'm Phil Thompson and thanks for joining me for Phil's Finance Fix. And today I'm going to do the unthinkable in business and talk about the taboo subject of politics. One of the reasons I'm doing this video, because at the end of the day, the federal government's main function is to collect our money in the form of taxes and redistribute it in a way that we as a collective feel meets our values. And every 3 years we get to vote on if we think the government is meeting our expectations. The other reason I'm doing this video is because I have no idea who I'm going to be voting for, and it's forced me to look more closely at each of the parties' policies. When I did the Vote Compass survey the other day to help me work out who I'm going to vote for, I came smack bang in the middle economically and socially progressive. Now this doesn't really surprise me, but it did not help me choose which way I'm going to lean when I vote on Saturday. Let me just get it out of the way and set the scene for you. I recognise I grew up in a really privileged position. I'm white, middle class male, and now self-employed working in a male dominated industry. And I voted for in 3 federal elections so far, and the most recent one I voted for the Liberals in the lower house and the Greens in the upper house. The reason I say this, even though I'm sure there will be people who disagree with how I voted for in the past, is to give you an idea of the inherent bias that I may bring in this comparison, even though my aim is to only talk about the facts. I'm going to give you the policy stances on the 2 major options, the Coalition and Labor, on things like the economy, health, welfare, education and the environment, and other policies that I'm personally passionate about. And I apologise, this video is going to go longer than normal, but please stick with me till the end. Now unfortunately, the 2 major parties' policies aren't very different from each other. They have very similar stances. And as we all know, as soon as one gets elected, the very next day, half of their policies are going to go out the window anyway. The economy is generally seen to be a big positive for the Coalition. And in this election, we've got 2 big policy announcements that are different between the parties on negative gearing and capital gains tax. If you don't have any clue what negative gearing or capital gains tax is, I've done some videos explaining how they work and I've put the links in the description below. The Coalition have stated that they've got no plans to make any changes to negative gearing or capital gains tax discount. However, Labor have announced that if they're elected from 1 July 2017 onwards, all new investments will have a capital gains tax discount reduced from 50% down to 25%, and they will get rid of all negative gearing on new investments from that date, with the exception of newly built investment properties. Now, Labor have said that this policy won't affect any existing negative gearing arrangement, nor will it be impacting any capital gains tax arrangements on any investments made before 1 July 2017. They have also estimated that this policy will generate $32.1 billion over a 10-year period, when I call BS. Look, I know these figures are done by Independent Parliamentary Budget Office, but this policy doesn't affect the $14.2 billion in lost revenue of the current negative gearing and capital gains tax arrangements, because it only affects investments from July 2017 onwards. And why I think these figures are well overstated is because capital gains tax figures are notoriously difficult to estimate. As you can see from Treasury papers written in 2014 talking about capital gains tax and the historical trends of the forecasting framework, yes, I did read Treasury papers, don't ask me about it. And it says that capital gains tax has been a major contributor of revenue forecasting errors over the last 10 years. And the reason is that capital gains tax is only paid when an investor sells the investment and makes a gain on that investment, which, as you can imagine, is dependent on so many different factors. And the negative gearing figures most likely presume that investors are going to invest the same way as they currently are, where less than 10% of all investment properties are newly constructed houses. Well, from 2017 onwards, if an investor is looking at an investment property and they've got 2 options, one gives them the negative gearing and one doesn't, they're almost certainly going to pick the property that gives them the tax benefit. I personally believe these figures are well overstated, but does that make this bad policy? Well, no, not necessarily. Negative gearing does in fact give a greater benefit to the higher income earners, as they're paying a higher percentage of tax as compared to someone on a lower income. And building into the tax system incentive to get investors building new properties is going to massively stimulate the building industry. However, this policy is not without its downfalls. The policy doesn't necessarily encourage investors to build new properties. It more discourages investors to buy existing homes, meaning that it could mean that your property that you live in now could reduce in value because of it. Because the demand for your property will potentially reduce, and the potential buyers are going to be first home buyers or people who are looking at upgrading or downgrading their family home. My position is negative gearing should remain. Something like 70% of all investment property owners only have one investment property, and they're doing this to create their own financial freedom. However, it does need some changes, such as capping the claimable expense to $5,000 per person. This means that the mum and dad investors out there won't be negatively hit, but it won't unfairly benefit the super rich. So the next issue is health. And the coalition has been very active in this space over the last few years, trying things like the $7 Medicare co-payment and then subsequently scrapping that. The other small differences in policies between the two major parties is Labor government said that they want to give an extra $2 billion to hospitals funding, and the coalition want to continue the indexation freeze on GP Medicare payments up to 2020. While Labor said if they come into government, they will cancel the freeze and increase the GP payments from 2017 onwards. And my position on health policies is it's difficult to say. Both of the major parties don't have any real major spending differences. I mean, Labor's saying that they'll give another $2 billion here, but there's nothing substantial. That said, the coalition have historically been looking at getting some savings and efficiency savings within the health system. So although there's no major policy announcements now, we could see that going into the future. Next is government welfare. And this is really where the rubber hits the road. This is where 1/3 of all government spending is, up to the tune of $150 billion a year. Much like health, the two major parties have more ideological differences instead of actual policy differences on government welfare. Labor think that there needs to be some changes to the system, but overall the system is good. While the coalition throughout the last few years in their budgets have shown that they are wanting to make some changes in this space. Most notably when Joe Hockey made the speech about the age of entitlement and talking about how middle class welfare needs to be pulled back. My position is that I totally agree that government welfare payments needs an overhaul and middle class welfare needs to be reined in. It's my belief that we shouldn't live in a society that pays thousands of dollars a year to a 65-year-old living in a $2 million house in Sydney and $1 million in a bank, or a young family with a combined income of $150,000 paying them thousands of dollars in government welfare when we have 2.5 million Australians, or 13.9% of the population, living below the poverty line. So to give you an example, in Australia, to be classified living underneath the poverty line, you need to be earning less than 50% of the median income. So for a couple with 2 children, they need to earn less than $43,372 every single year to be classified living in poverty. Even though I'm personally a huge benefactor of middle class welfare, I've got 3 young kids all in childcare, I still don't believe it's sustainable. Unfortunately, I don't think any of the major parties are going to make any significant changes to middle class welfare. However, I am buoyed by the fact that at least the coalition are calling the elephant in the room. The next big issue in the election is education, and this is the big difference between the major parties. Liberals came into government and scrapped the last 2 years of Gonski funding, only giving $1.2 billion to the last 2 years of Gonski. I'm by far not an expert on Gonski, but I understand it was a 6-year funding program. First 4 years was the cheaper years, and the last 2 years is where it really ramped up. And Labor have committed to the original Gonski plan of spending $4.5 billion in those last 2 years. But more than the actual funding commitments that each party's committed It's more ideological differences between the party. The coalition fundamentally want the funding to go directly towards student outcomes and performances, while the Labor government want funding to go more directly to students and to help students with special needs. Now, I've never been a teacher and never worked in the education system, so it's difficult for me to have a fully informed opinion on the different policies, so I'll leave that one up to you. So the environment, or more specifically global warming, is another big factor in this election. So with the two major parties, they've got different emissions targets and renewable energy targets that they want to reach, and they've both got different ways of reaching those targets. The coalition's target is to cut emissions by 26 to 28% by 2030, and to have all electricity have 20% of it come from renewable energy by 2020. Now they plan to hit this target by what they call the Direct Action Plan. Now they have set aside $2.55 billion to give to big corporates on projects that help them achieve these carbon emission reduction targets. Now Labor's target is to reduce emissions by 45% by 2050 and to have 50% of all electricity through renewable energy by 2030. Now Labor plan to have two emission trading schemes, one for electricity companies and one for big industry. And they have stated that they don't think this will have a large impact on the cost of goods. The issue with these policies is, one, I've got no idea how all this stuff works. And number two, these targets are so far away. Now my position is global warming is a massive threat to our current way of living and we need to do something about it. But like myself, and I'm sure 99.99% of all Australians, we have no idea if either policy will actually make an impact. So let's say the coalition win and we don't hit our emission reduction targets by 2030. Do we then point the finger back at Malcolm Turnbull and say, well, we haven't hit the targets, it's your fault? Well, no, he's just going to blame successive governments and say, well, they've changed legislation or they've changed policy and that's why we didn't hit the targets. Or if Labor win government and by 2050 we haven't hit our reduction targets of reducing by 45%, do we then look at Bill Shorten? Well, no, we barely have any time to look back last week and keep anyone accountable. So how are we going to look back 35 years to keep someone accountable? Again, I have no idea how greenhouse gas emissions are tracked, but we shouldn't have these lofty targets of 35 years time. We should have targets of 1, 2, 3 years time. So when we go to the polls, we can actually judge if they're hitting their targets or not. Now the next two issues I'm personally really passionate about. Now the first one is National Broadband Network, or NBN. Now NBN has been a disaster for both Labor and the coalition. So Labor brought it in that they wanted to roll out high-speed internet all around Australia at the cost of $44.9 billion. And under the Labor government, the cost got blown out. And then the coalition came into government and said, you know what, we're going to change the plan. Instead of going fibre to the premises, we're going fibre to the node. It's only going to cost us around $29 billion and we're going to get it done by 2016. Well, guess what? It's 2016 now and we don't have NBN. NBN is now expected to cost $56 billion. And the coalition government have now revised their plans for NBN to use different internet technologies. So some satellite, some fibre to the premises, some fibre to the node. Now Labor have stated that they are committing to fibre to the node, which is what the Liberals' original plan was. And they're committed $57 billion worth of spending and they expect it to be done by mid-2022. Now the world is run on technology. And the internet is the single greatest equalizer of opportunity we have ever seen in our lifetime. And we need good quality internet connection in this country and will be a huge driver of the economy going forward. Now the last topic I want to talk about, and it's a really contentious one, it's the asylum seeker policy of the two major parties. Barack Obama made a speech to a US university a few years ago, and this is what he said. You know, there's a lot of talk in this country about the federal deficit. But I think we should talk more about the empathy deficit, the ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, to see the world through the eyes of those who are different from us. When you think like this, when you choose to broaden your ambit of concern and empathise with the plight of others, whether they are close friends or distant strangers, it becomes harder not to act, harder not to care. That is exactly what we need in this country. More empathy for people who are seeking asylum. They have fled some horrific circumstances, and the two major parties in this country have abhorrent policies. The turn back the boats and offshore processing policies are ridiculous, and they're costing us $3 billion every single year, with costs such as paying the Cambodian government $55 million to resettle 4 refugees. If we decided to do onshore processing for asylum seekers, it would cost us just a fraction of what we're currently spending, not to mention the fact that what we're doing now is illegal and immoral. Our country is built on a foundation of immigration, with Chinese, Italians and Vietnamese, and in more recent times Indians and Filipinos, and the list goes on. And it has had a huge positive impact on our country and on our economy. Immigration is a good thing, and the idea that immigration will somehow take our jobs away is ridiculous. I saw it written the other day that said, for someone from a non-English speaking background with minimal skills and no recognised degree to take your job, maybe you should look at yourself and before you start getting annoyed at them. Now, I don't want to brush over the fact that people legitimately have a fear that a terrorist attack could happen in Australia. But should this be the reason we are sending thousands upon thousands of people, including women and children, into prison for on average 450 days, all in limbo without any idea of when they're going to get out? Well, I'll leave that one for you to decide. Voting is really important, and we get a massive say on how we want our country to be run. I'd encourage you to spend 30 minutes researching the different policies. Go to the ABC Vote Compass website, do the survey, and work out what policies you closely align to, and make an informed decision on Saturday. Thank you for watching and making it all the way through the video. I've put some links in the description below, including the ABC Vote Compass website. And I'd love you to do 2 things for me. The first thing is, let me know what you thought of this video, whether you agree or disagree, in the comment section below. And the second thing is, I'd love as many people to see this video as possible, so please share it. Thanks again, I'll see you next week. On the economy, health, whatever the other ones are. Welfare, health, welfare, education, environment. Yes! I got the stats right. Booyah.